Welcome folks to Governance Training for CRCs. Today I'm joined by the most magnificent John Denton. Welcome back, John.
Thank you, Andrew. It's a pleasure to be here again.
And today we have our guest Lisa Fisher, Chair of the Merredin CRC. Welcome aboard, Lisa.
Thanks, Andrew.
So a little bit about your role with the CRC. How long have you been involved there as a Chair?
I've been there 3.5 years as a member of the CRC, but 3 years probably as Chair.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And a bit about your committee size. How many people you got on the committee there?
We've got 8 on our committee, Andrew.
And a mix of in-town people, out of town?
Mainly in-town people, but we are trying to recruit people from the district.
Fantastic. I've been hearing really good things about what's going on out there, so really looking forward to hearing a bit more about your practical experience and how it can help the other people who are viewing today. We'll do a bit of a catch-up at the moment. Today we're midway through the program, so we're focusing on managing priorities. So we're halfway through our 10-episode series. I want to just quickly recap what we covered last time. It was a pretty heavy-duty episode on financial management where John and Charles took us through critical things like being able to understand your financial reports, knowing the importance of budgeting, being able to source funds through planning, and becoming self-sustaining. Look at what are some of the ways you can make sure that your CRC isn't relying on just state government funding for its long-term viability. Today, an action-packed episode, as always. We're going to look at high payoff activities where you need to be investing your time to get the best value. We're going to be talking about running effective meetings and how we can make sure that you're really getting the most out of your CRC committee. And we're also going to help you have some ways to measure the results of your strategic work, making sure you're focused on the big picture and knowing exactly how you can get there. We're going to start off today with you, John, taking us through high payoff activities. I'm really interested to hear about this and what you've got to take us through there.
Sure, thank you, Andrew. High payoff activities is a term that I use a lot with business owners and boards and people in positions of authority. It's about really understanding what your high payoff activities are. That's the first step. So a high payoff activity is or are activities that you do on a day-by-day basis which give the greatest return for your time invested. So that's quite a technical definition, I guess, but so it's about spending your time on the most important things. Back in episode 4, when we talked about fundraising, we talked about putting a measure in place to work out what the return on investment was dollar-wise for the number of dollars invested. Well, this is a similar thing, Andrew, except we're looking at the time invested and what the return to the CRC is for the time that you invest. So that's what a high payoff activity is. How do you identify what your high payoff activities are in your role? So the first thing is to think about what are some of the skills, or what are some of the tasks rather, that you perform in your role. And some of that will be mentioned in the Constitution, and some of it will be due to the skills that you have, which was the reason that you were brought onto the board, quite possibly. So what are some of the unique skills you have? And then let's look at the role and how you're going to apply those skills, and avoiding some of the low payoffs. You know, it's very easy with all the interruptions that we get and the things that go on a day-by-day basis to get distracted from doing the most important things. So identify what the most important things are, and then we'll look at some ways that you can focus on them. Okay?
I'm just going to ask a couple of questions of you there, because I know you pretty well. If I had you on a board, the things I'd have you focusing on most would probably be getting the board. I'd have you in your role thinking about the strategy of the board, and I'd be using your critical analysis skills, looking at the budgets and that type of thing. So to me, if I had you on a board, that'd be a high payoff activity I want you to focus on.
Okay, and I'd probably agree with that, Andrew.
Yeah.
So it really is knowing what your unique skills are and what it is that you bring to the board and contribute, and then focusing most of your time and energy on that.
Absolutely, because you brought me onto a board and got me to do that. Complete disaster. It wouldn't be good. It'd be completely a low payoff activity. So I think we're just going to make it really clear that, let's play to your strengths when you're thinking about your high payoff activities and really go for that. I could provide some good humour, use my good looks, that'd be about it.
Yeah, okay. And Lisa, maybe you could tell us, in your opinion, what some of the high payoff activities are for a chairperson.
Firstly, as a chair, you're directing where your CRC's going. You interact with the coordinator on a day-to-day basis and make sure the staff are following policy and procedure, and in general, as Andrew said, good looks and charm. So
Absolutely. So, yes, and they're all high payoff activities in that particular role.
keeping
So-
the humour going.
So they could be role-based type activities or just skill-based high payoff activities. And another way to think about high payoff activities and to work out what your high payoff activities are is to use a quadrant system, which is quite well known. It's been documented in a few books, and it looks something like this. It's about looking at things in terms of importance and urgency. And if you fit them into this matrix, then those things will go into different quadrants. So it's about looking at the tasks. And you can see from this that the top left-hand quadrant is all about things that are important and urgent. So these are things that you just can't put off. They've got to be done now because it's an important item and it's urgent. So typically in this quadrant we get things like emergencies, breakdowns, things have gone wrong, things have come off track. It could be people issues, it could be somebody not turning up for work or whatever. It now becomes a bit of a crisis.
Code red, bump, bump, that type of thing.
That's it. And so you've just got to do it. And then if we look at the quadrant underneath that, it appears to be urgent, but it's not important. Now, by that, things that can appear urgent are things like telephones ringing, emails popping up, so a good strategy is don't have pop-ups on your computer, so it's a distraction. Even mail coming in, hard copy mail, if anybody gets any of that anymore, it can be a distraction because you feel you've got to deal with it now. And some of those things can be quite deceptive because they're not so important and they're not really urgent. And then over on the bottom right, things that we tend to retreat to when we've spent too much time in the code red quadrant, Andrew. We've become stressed out, we've been dealing with emergencies and issues, and suddenly we need to take a break and have a breather. So we go into that bottom right-hand quadrant, which is, surfing the internet, doing the footy tipping, although some people would put that in the important category.
Yeah.
It's a bit of an escape. And then in the top right quadrant, we've got the things that are important but not urgent. Now I'm going to put a label on these quadrants for you. The top left quadrant, where things have got to be addressed right away because they're urgent and important, and it is red, Andrew, just for you,
Thank
is what we call the crisis quadrant. And then underneath that, the things that appear to be urgent and demand our attention but may not actually be important, that's called the deception quadrant, because we're deceived into thinking we've got to deal with it. And then over on the bottom right is the escape quadrant, because that's where you go when you spent too much time in the red zone. And then the top right is the success quadrant, because that's where the best results come from. That's the high payoff activities, and that's where you get the biggest return on investment. The challenge with those, Andrew and Lisa, is, and we can have a bit of discussion about that, is that they're typically things that are important and need to be done, but they're not urgent. And because they're not urgent, they're very easy to put off. So they tend not to get done, and then a deadline comes up, and suddenly they move over into the crisis quadrant. Have you ever been there, Andrew, and seen things like that happen?
Oh, yes, regularly. A couple of things like that can be when you start off perhaps doing a funding submission and you've given yourself a month to get it ready, and then you just keep putting it off, and there's a fair bit riding on it. Then it comes into that last week, and then it goes well and truly into that crisis code red area and you start just losing the plot of it, I think, because it's suddenly that timeline just goes tick, 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 tick. You really start to freak out a bit. So to me, that's one of the things I've seen tenders and funding submissions that start off with plenty of time frame, but then you just let it go until it's
Absolutely.
game over, basically.
It never happens in Meriden, does it, Lisa?
No, it doesn't actually.
No.
No.
If
We're
you,
very organised.
Good.
CRC.
Excellent. yeah, and that's the way it should be. If you plan and prepare in advance, then most of those things can get done. The important things get done without it becoming a crisis, and that's what you're trying to achieve. And Stephen Covey in his books refers to the big rocks. So it's about putting the big rocks, that quadrant 2 items, into your calendar and your diary first, and working on those before you deal with the other stuff.
So like your big ticket items, the ones that really count the most.
Exactly.
Yep,
Yeah, the
gotcha.
biggest return items,
Yep.
for sure. So, okay, that's all good. So now that we know what high payoff activities are, we know a couple of ways to identify what the high payoff activities are for the CRC and for us personally. The question now is, how do we focus on those high payoff activities and not get distracted? So again, one of the things I recommend, and Andrew, I welcome comments from you on this, is to block time out in your calendar. So put the high payoffs into your calendar first. When are you going to spend time working on them? And even do it by week, by month, or by year for things that have got to be done. End of month accounts, end of year accounts. There are things that happen on a cyclical basis that you can plan for. Then think about what's the most productive time of the day to do things. Things like planning your day and planning what's going to happen in the next 7 or 8 hours of business, and deciding whether your preferred planning time is first thing in the morning or last thing in the evening. It's usually one of those two. So any preferences there, Lisa, for planning time?
Planning time would obviously, for the CRC, be first thing in the morning. I'm a nighttime, end of day planning person. So our coordinator obviously plans those activities for the day, daily tasks, and we have monthly meetings. We couldn't survive if we weren't holding those meetings monthly. So that's how we pull everything together.
Fantastic. Andrew, morning or?
Oh, definitely morning for me. That's when I'm certainly most focused, and I try to make sure I minimise any distractions at that stage. So it's trying to do outrageous things like not have my email turned on, switching phones off. If this is something that requires 100% of my focus and is really important stuff, phone goes off. So just go into complete lockdown, and that just makes a massive difference in how much concentrated work and effort you can get in that short time.
Yes, it's interesting. Some people are very good at staying focused on things. Other people, myself included, can get off track a bit. And I find a good way to set time to work on your HPAs is even do it in 20-minute blocks if necessary. And just say for the next 20 minutes I'm not going to do anything else except work on this, and then get it done and move on to the next thing. Or do 20 minutes, get up, file something, come back and do another 20 minutes. So it's really keeping high payoff activities at the front of mind. The other great thing to do as well with high payoff activities or any time management activities is to review it from time to time. So make up a little timesheet, and for a week just go through and track where your time's actually going, and then come back and analyse, was that time spent on high payoff or low payoff? So we haven't talked about low payoffs, but low payoffs are things that could easily be delegated or done by somebody else or even put off. And I find that when most people do that review, they're surprised at how their high payoff activity time starts to drop off if they don't keep focused on it. Any comments on that?
Just answering your question in a different way, I am a list person. I find I need to prioritise and write a list so I can tick those off. And that's the only way some people can function. But that's my...
Yeah, so have a list.
A list. And then you soon work out what the priorities on those lists. If you have
Excellent.
more than one list, you may be a person that needs more than one, depending on what you're juggling at the time.
It's a great idea in terms of it can also help you identify what are the low payoff activities. when you get into your second list of the day, I think then you start, for me, I'd be starting to think about, okay, which ones of these do I need to put on to a low priority or
Yep.
give to someone else? And
Mm-hmm.
and for me, I work for myself, have my own business, so things like doing my own accounts, probably a low payoff when I can get a bookkeeper in and they can do that and they're much quicker and better at it than I am and charge less. So that's an example of a low payoff, which
Sure.
works for me.
Yep. And producing documents is one of mine. I hate using Word to try and format documents. I mean, it's very powerful, but I can delegate that over the internet and get it done for $5 or $10 overnight while I'm sleeping. So
Yeah.
there's lots of ways to get
Ooh.
some of those low payoff things done.
I need to talk to you after the show.
Yeah,
No
there's
problem.
great opportunities there. The other thing too, I think we should mention, John, with the reviewing the time spent on your high payoff activities, is also saying, well, if I spent this amount of time on my high payoff activities, what was the result? And my experience is you'll find that, geez, that's actually really paid off a lot compared to when I just did everything.
Yeah, and that's very satisfying, isn't it, Andrew?
You betcha.
Then you go home at the end of the day feeling satisfied you've achieved things.
Yeah.
So what we've covered in this little segment here is we've defined what high payoff activities are. We've looked at how we can identify what our high payoff activities are in our role at the CRC. And then we've talked about some tips and techniques for focusing and spending more time on those high payoffs. So that's terrific. Thank you, Lisa and Andrew. Now, Andrew, one of the things that a lot of board members spend time on at CRCs and other not-for-profits is spending time in meetings. Meetings, bloody meetings, as they say. So there are effective ways to run meetings, and then I know you've got some very good tips and suggestions for us on that, Andrew. So would you take us through that, please?
Love to. Thanks, John. Probably one of the best things I've learned in terms of meetings is really getting quite clear right from the start about structures of meetings. So I'm going to start off with just a couple of tips about meeting structure, and then Lisa, I think it'd be worthwhile just to really
Sure.
talk a bit about the Meriden experience and what works for you guys. So for me, in terms of thinking about your meeting structure and planning, the first thing that's really given me direction is this acronym of POP, which relates to, the first one is about purpose, thinking about why are you holding the meeting? What is it you really want to achieve from it? At the end of the day, when you walk out of the meeting room, what is it that you want to have had done and have in place? The next part of this acronym is thinking about the outcomes. What is the meeting actually going to deliver? What's something tangible and measurable that you know you'll have achieved as a group from holding that meeting? And the third part, I think, which a lot of us are pretty good at, is just thinking about the process. How are we going to achieve these outcomes? What are some of the things I'm going to need to get people involved in the conversation during the meeting? And perhaps how am I going to manage some of the people in the meeting to make sure we're really focused on that purpose and outcome? Lisa, you mentioned earlier that you guys meet about once a month with
We
your
do.
committee.
Yes, we do. One of the biggest things with holding meetings is that we have to make sure that the members, there's an executive committee for a start. What we do is, so that the meetings aren't tedious, is have an executive meeting once a month. So our minutes come out for previous meetings. We go over what we need to from prior projects and so forth, and we then discuss all the nitty-gritty stuff that we don't want to be wasting our members' time on in our general meeting, which is once a month. We also, the agenda comes out at least a week before, so we read all the reports, everything's read before the meeting. Consequently, we're not held up discussing finances and things that people really don't want to listen to any great degree. That makes the meeting a bit more interesting. Then we can get down to general business, what we're actually there for.
Great. I'm going to come back to you in just a moment to get some more of those tips there. I want to talk briefly a bit about purpose of meetings and tapping into those outcomes. So for some meetings, I think we need to be really clear on what we're there to do. So for some part of the meeting is actually just to share information, to let people know what's happened. It could be a change in policy or procedure. It could be to actually perhaps develop a new policy for your CRC, and so you need to actually get input from the members there. Another outcome from a meeting is to improve understanding. So to make sure that members of the CRC are really clear on what the impact of this policy could be for them and for the CRC. And the other one is finally to make decisions. So to me, I think anyone who's in that chairing role or involved in a committee has to be quite clear on which one of these we're going to do and during which part of the meeting. So people are quite clear on where we're going with this meeting and what you're wanting from them. Because there's no point trying to get input from people if a decision's already been made. But there's no point trying to make a decision if you're not going to get people's input, because then it just seems like you're the only one doing. It's become your show rather than anyone else's. I know that with your meetings, you have a couple of different ways to get people's input and a couple of different ways to make sure people enjoy the meeting. What are some of the things you do there?
One of the ways we bribe people. No, we.
Oh, good.
We don't.
That always works.
Well, we have dinner after the meeting, so we're not eating while we're having the meeting, but it encourages people to stay around and to have extra discussion if necessary after those decisions are made, but just to get to know each other better, and so the meal is a good idea.
Absolutely.
And it's also thanking people as volunteers for putting their time in. So, it's a bonus.
And you find that social time helps bond the group a bit or get them working?
Most definitely. As a group, we've become very close, which can seem a bit, at times, isn't a good idea. But in a small town, I think that's important to build those relationships.
And it's interesting you mentioned this, the meal things. My parents are involved in a committee in their hometown. They've been there in it for yonks, and Mum keeps sort of saying, don't really want to go to these meetings because they're on at 6 o'clock at night, and they don't do the meal thing. And so that for them that would be a great incentive to have that social side of things, and also not be worried about, are we going to get that before dinner, after dinner, that type of thing.
Or no dinner.
Or no dinner.
And another good way is to have your meetings at lunchtime, which also keeps a time limit on things, because if people have only got an hour, then you're not really going over time. You'll make sure that it's concise.
Absolutely. And I reckon that's a great strategy, because it'll help people who are the retirees who have got more flexibility in their time, like my folks, but also help the working people to have the business done and not sort of impinge on their home and family time later on.
Yeah, and you'll find most people on committees are also on another number of committees. It's not just the one, so they don't want to be held up with meetings constantly and going over tedious stuff. Let's
just move on a bit now, and I want to quickly just cover off on I guess a simple process for presenting topics in meetings. So we talked about previously the sharing information and getting input and improving understanding and making decisions. I just want to briefly share a way to do that. So the simple meeting process is firstly just to present the issue, if you're a chair or speaking to an issue, then get feedback. So ask usually a couple of open questions of people who are on the committee about their view or opinion on the issue you're presenting. Then work with them to say, what are some of the options here? What are your solutions? Because I think one of the worst things you can probably have happen in a committee meeting is for people to see an issue or an idea come up and then just say, here are all the things that are wrong with it. So to me, it's important to say, well, what are the options? What are the possibilities? Where can we go with this? And then work to say, okay, now that we've identified the possible options, which one are we going to take forward and how are we going to do that?
And at that point, that's when you need to get to the W question.
Take me through the W
question?
Oh.
Yeah, what's going to be done, who's going to do it, and when is it going to be done by?
That's 3 W's.
The 3 W question.
www.
And then that can be documented in the minutes as well, so that it's very, very clear on what's got to be done, who's going to do it, and by when.
Beautiful.
Then there's no misunderstandings.
Yep. And agree what you've agreed on, I guess, from that perspective.
Absolutely, yes. What did we just agree? Is always a good question to ask.
Absolutely.
If I could just make a couple more comments about
that'd be great. Thanks.
Meetings as well, is don't be afraid, and I recommend that you do this, put the meeting on the agenda for the meeting about every 3 or 4 months. And that may sound strange, but the idea of that is to actually review if the meetings are working and what could be done to improve the meeting. And that's something that I found with some of my clients, that they've really changed how they run meetings just by, at the end of one of the meetings, every 3 or 4 meetings, saying, did we achieve what we wanted to achieve? What could we have done better?
Yeah. So what worked well? What could be improved? Those
Yeah.
sort of things.
Yeah, that's right. And the other thing, just going back to the motivation for people to come to the meetings, the chair has a very important role to play in making the meetings interesting and vibrant, and setting the mood of the meetings. Many years ago, somebody gave me the tip when I was chair of a board. They said, look, you can't come in and afford to be on a downer, because the minute people see you're down, everybody else will go down, and the whole mood of the meeting will change. So, you know, go to Andrew's coffee shop if it's first thing in the morning and get a couple of strong coffees and sort of come in bouncing around. It will just change how everybody feels about the meeting.
Absolutely. Great tip.
Yeah.
Thank
And I'm
you.
going to take your tip. I'm going to recommend to a board that I sit on that meets at 7:30 in the morning that we don't just have biscuits, but we have breakfast.
Definitely.
Yeah.
That's
So thank you for that, Lisa.
my pleasure.
Okay, Andrew, that was my saying.
I like your say, John, as always. Plenty to offer there. One other little favourite of mine, if you really push for time, is the stand-up meeting. So this is my Darth Vader meeting process, where there is no biscuits, there is no breakfast. It's like we've got business to do, we stand up, we get our meeting done, and we're out of there 15 minutes flat. It just
You can
works.
save a lot of money on chairs too.
Absolutely.
You could have treadmills.
That's
and
what
that
meetings
would-
usually are.
Yes, but then
No,
I
you
know,
won't.
go there.
I'm thinking this now. We've got the trademark on this. I just want to
Yeah.
point that out
All
before
right.
we go any further. And speaking of going further, I'd like to hear more about meeting for the right purpose. We talked a bit about purpose there earlier on. I think it's worthwhile now to really make sure that when we get into our meetings, we're keeping that big picture in mind and some ideas on how to do that. John, take us through that, please.
It's about trying to be strategic in the meetings. So it's very easy in a meeting to get bogged down on the day-to-day operations and things that are going on. But the chair's role is really to keep the focus on the strategic issues. What are the big picture things? What's the purpose that we're here for? And I recommend that on the agenda you actually put the vision statement for the CRC, just to remind everybody on a continuous basis why we exist and why we're doing what we're doing, and try and keep that focus on the longer term things. So just to define what a strategy is a long term how we're going to do something. So if we were a troop of soldiers rather than a CRC, then obviously we want to win the war. So one of the strategies to win the war might be to storm a particular hill. All right, so the strategy is we've got to take that hill. Then when we come down to, well, let's have a look at how we're going to do that, we then get into the tactics. So I'll take these 2 guys and I'll go around the left side of the hill. You take the other troops and go around the right side, and we'll come at it that way. So that's more tactical, and that's the doing stuff. So then you're getting down to the shorter term, medium, shorter term things. And then finally you've got the operational issues. So, okay, we're going to storm this hill. It's going to take us a week. You know, we've got to feed the troops. We've got to have supplies and ammunition and all those kind of things. So that's making sure that everything's in place for the CRC to keep doing what it does on a day-by-day basis. So in the meetings, the chair and everybody that's on the board should be keeping in mind that we're here to satisfy the overall strategy.
So it's really, again, to me, it's thinking, what's the big picture here? What is it we're really trying to do? And you gave the example of the hill. For the CRC, it could be thinking about, I guess a big strategic issue would be funding, staffing,
Money.
those
Money.
sort of, resources, those type of things. So thinking about how we're going to maintain funding over the next 12 months could be a big strategic issue. Then the tactical part will be thinking about where are those sources of funding, what's available now, and the operational part will going to be, well, who's going to go and actually put the submission in? Would be, I guess, my guess on it. Lisa, would that be sort of where you're focusing some of your real big picture issues?
Definitely, and just by what John was saying, I was thinking that not to be defeated by things that aren't working. It's really important to stay buoyant, focus on the things that are working for you and follow those through. Don't let negativities stop you from moving in the forward direction. So we're on the same battlefield.
Yeah, but
John?
you made a great point earlier,
Yeah.
Lisa, about getting some of the more mundane things out of the way before you have the general meeting.
That's right, and that's why it's important we have the executive meeting. And okay, it's more time again for people outside of their hours, but it is really productive, and we've achieved over the time I've been chair. We've put in policies, a whole policies and procedures manual through doing those executive meetings. There's a lot achieved in them, and it really does give us more focus on the really important issues.
Absolutely, fantastic. I've seen meetings get bogged down in
Oh.
trivia, and then
Yeah.
when you get to the important things, everybody's got to go because they've run out of time. So
Actually, I must also mention that not allowing gossip and inane talking, that's part of the chair's role, is to keep those meetings really tight. That doesn't say that you have to have a boring meeting. You just don't want to be going on tangents all over the place.
you know if you're doing well if you can measure the results that you're getting.
Hmm.
So again, with meetings or any strategies that you're working on, think about how you're going to measure the results. So the first thing is, what are the success measures? How do we know we're being successful in doing what we do? So work out what some of the measures are, and then identify degrees to which the goal is being achieved. And there's a great tool that I've used over the years called Above the Line and Below the Line, which is fantastic in meetings because it's very easy when you're talking about goals that you set to do from previous meetings,
Mm-hmm.
and they haven't been done. And it's very easy for people in the meeting to now get below the line. Below the line is lay, blame and justify. People will sit there and they will spend ages coming up with stories about why they haven't done things or things haven't been done. Or they'll lay blame on usually the government or somebody like that, or the climate or whatever, but that achieves nothing. You're just letting yourself off the hook, really, or people are letting themselves off the hook. So it's really important to get to say above the line, which is taking responsibility and saying, okay, the reality is that these things haven't been done and this is where we're at right now. So what are we going to do about it? How are we going to make up the difference?
Absolutely. And for me, this measure side of it is, and this degree to which the goal was achieved. And I'll go back to the funding part. It could be saying, well, this year we set out to get $100,000 of funding from outside government sources. We've gone back and reviewed it, and we've got $75,000. So to me, the degree to which the goal was achieved was 75%. That's not a bad effort. And so part of it could be to think, well, how do we get to that 100% mark? What do we put in place to get to there?
So one of the things when you're doing that review is to look at, well, if things didn't happen how we planned that they would happen, then what are some of the barriers? What are some of the things that have happened to prevent that? And then what are some of the enablers? What are some things we can do to get back on track?
Yeah, we use a SWOT, strength, weaknesses, opportunities
Yep.
and
Threats.
Threats.
Yep.
That's it. Not treats, threats. And that's a good one to use quickly. Get everyone to write down their ideas, and strategic planning. And of course, you've got all of those tools on the CRC website.
Yeah, the through
templates,
MSO.
MSO, that's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So it's all there for you. It's easily accessed.
Good tip.
Of course, once you've done that analysis and you've looked at the enablers and things that you can do, then update and reset the goal. But don't leave it just hanging. The thing is to make sure that you keep moving forward and keep moving towards achieving those goals, and use the tools and the people that are available to you to do that. So, Andrew, that just about covers the point about remaining strategic and achieving the big goals, the big ticket items.
Thanks, John. A quick recap in terms of the things we've covered today. We've looked at the high payoff activities, John, that you took us through, and the importance of being focused on that and how to maintain our focus on those. We talked about how to run effective meetings and what we really need to be making sure we're doing to make those meetings both enjoyable for our committee members, but also delivering results constantly. And John's just taken us through how to measure the results of that work and making sure that we really continue to deliver and we're transparent in our work so people can see that, yep, this Merredin CRC, we've got complete faith in those guys because we can see that they're delivering the goods and they're reporting back to us. So to me, I think they're just great, simple ways to make sure we're on track with running our CRCs and making sure they're delivering the goods. Anything else to add from you, John or Lisa, in terms of making sure that we're delivering the goods? Or we think we're well covered?
Well, I think we've covered it pretty well. It's, knowing what your priorities are and maintaining those priorities and keeping them at front of mind.
Yeah, and just be strong in your commitment to, in my position, not be swayed by friendships or things that can really send you off track, really, or allow the staffing side of it to control the committee. You really need the committee to take responsibility. Responsibility for self is one of my biggest
Wonderful
issues.
Yeah, and that's really fitting with John's mantra of
Yep.
being above the line. And,
Yep.
and that's a great intro into our next episode. So we'll talk briefly about that in a moment. In between, for you watching the episode, if you could get back to the workbook and think about what are 3 things that you really want to address and make a change in from this episode. And remember, MSO has heaps of fantastic resources for CRCs. Here are just a few that we recommend that are most relevant to today's episode. We're looking forward to seeing you again in our next episode, which is looking at team development. So we're looking forward to sharing some more time with you again soon. Thanks, John, again for being with us by our side.
Pleasure. Loved it, Andrew.
Excellent. And thanks, Lisa, for making the journey from Merredin. Really enjoyed having you here, and thanks so much for the practical tips you've been able to work with us through on today.
Thanks, Andrew and John. Really enjoyed it.
No worries. Thanks, everyone. We look forward to seeing you in episode 6, Team Development. Bye now.